And what happened last time? If I saw it was hard for people to join, then I switched it over to my page because nobody was on.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see if we start getting some views.
I'm sorry for this terrible cough. It's going to plague me for the rest of the night.
So I usually get if I get to 2 minutes and nobody's jumped on, then hi Kimberly, thanks for joining. If you are joining us, please let us know that you're here. Wave, give us a thumbs up. We will be starting shortly our final Facebook episode for tonight from the Surviving R. Kelly docuseries. And so we'll go ahead. We have some more folk that are popping in. Thank y'all so much. Hey, Rodney, thanks for joining us on this evening. And so before we get started, I want to introduce myself because we are broadcasting this evening from the Hive's Facebook page. So my name is Ashley Thomas, and I am the founder and executive director of the Hive Community Circle. And I have with me on tonight some special guests as well, and returning guests as well, who will introduce themselves as well. So go ahead.
Hi, I'm Ashley Young. I'm a licensed professional counselor with Palmetto Counseling Associates.
Awesome. Thank you for being with us,
Thank
Ashley.
you. Happy to be here.
My name is Ricky Pulley. I am the Underserved Survivor Outreach Coordinator at Sexual Trauma Services of the Midlands.
Thank you again, Ricky. We are glad to have you here. Hi, First Lady Shan. Thanks so much for tuning in. And Kimberly, you said you saw the topic. Thank you, yes, for tuning in to this. Hey, Val, thank y'all that are tuning in. And so if you have been following our Facebook Live, the second episode, we talked about the lack of accountability from the criminal justice system, the way in which, unfortunately, as a community and as a society, we have assisted with the level of fame and the platform that R. Kelly has been able to create and establish for himself. And we also touched on sex trafficking as well, just because some of the tactics that R. Kelly used to groom some of these young ladies are some of the same tactics that are unfortunately used within sex trafficking, and we wanted to really make sure we shedded light on that. For tonight's episode, we are going to really be covering episode 5 and 6, which were, to me, I don't know about y'all, but they were like the most intense and they were very heavy. And so while we don't want to focus this entire conversation on R. Kelly, we really want to make sure that we start shedding light, and so that the community, we as a community, really understand sexual violence, we understand intimate partner violence, and that whether you're watching or you see this video that's, going around on Facebook, you can share it with somebody else, or you at least know how to inform someone of resources that are available to them here in the Midlands. And so we'll have that clinical perspective on tonight with Ashley, and then we'll also have that community perspective that will come as well. Hi again, First Lady Shan. And so one of the things I think I've heard a lot of people talk about is the response that, I last night had an opportunity to do an event with USC, and one of the students shared how it wasn't the episodes that so much took her back, it was how people responded afterwards to the docuseries. It was, the comments that she saw surfacing on Facebook, on Instagram, and Twitter. And I know we've seen some other comments that people have, that have disappointed people from the community as well. And I want us to touch on that. And so I think, one of the things that people have been saying, or some of the comments have been, of course, why now? Or, what was their motive behind it? Did they, how do we know that they didn't consent, or they knew what they were asking for? They knew what they were getting themselves into, even some of them who were young and were a child, right? And so I thought it would be really important for us to really clarify for those that are watching. Thank you for joining and tuning in. What consent is. Like, I think we really need to make sure that the community and people really have a clear understanding of what consent is. So let's start there.
So we understand consent. First of all, there's an age of consent.
Yes.
In the state of South Carolina, that age is 16 years old for young men or women. But we understand consent to be an agreement that's given equally by all partners to engage in a specific activity, right, at that moment. So that means it can't be, given today for tomorrow. Right. It has to be given today for today at the time that it's happening today. Right. It can't be given this morning for this evening. So understanding that it happens at the moment, and then both parties have to have a clear understanding of what's being asked and agreed upon, and consent is freely given with no coercion from either party. So no one's being pressured into doing this. It's not forced to do it or anything like that. They're freely able to consent to this, meaning they're also not impaired by any substances, right?
Yes.
So any alcohol, any drugs, anything like that, nothing is impairing their judgment. And then it's never to be assumed, and it can be taken at any time.
It can be revoked.
Yep, it can be revoked at any time.
And and I feel like sometimes people have a hard time understanding that a person can recant or revoke their yes. That I have the right as an individual, this is my body, I can take my yes back.
Yeah, and I think as it relates to our body, sometimes those conversations aren't had. There's an assumption that we know what right and wrong is, but as we know with perpetrators, sometimes it doesn't seem so cut and dry. It's not always violent. It's not always aggressive. It doesn't always appear threatening. Sometimes it can appear loving. And it can feel like it's fulfilling a need. And so it's important that even in those situations that we're sending the message that at any point that you're uncomfortable, that's enough. That's when consent can be revoked. It's also when it should be given. And although someone is caring and loving, there should never be an assumption that they could have access or some part of you or your body. And with kids, sometimes it's a struggle, to be able to identify that. If it seems soft and nurturing, then it's bad, right? And so sometimes those conversations has to be had about the areas that should be restricted. And so I think sometimes those present challenges in giving consent, because sometimes we want the company, and people want the conversation, and that feels good, but they don't want anything beyond that. So if I say no now, then I'm revoking all of it. And so just recognizing that you can feel empowered every step of the way.
No, thank you. Thank you for that, Ashley. And can you just touch on, I know you touched a little bit around child sexual abuse. Could you touch on how we define child sexual abuse? I know that's the area that you work in and really specialize through your agency.
No, yeah, sure. Sexual assault, as it relates to child abuse, any sexual act between an adult and a child. And so again, it's not a consideration of consent in that act. An adult and a child, that's abuse. And so it can be in the form of coercion, physical limitations, it could be physical touch, but it also could be sharing videos. It can also be having a child perform an act, reveal something, even if there's no touching, but having exposure. All of those are under the umbrella of child abuse.
Thank you. And thank you for that. And I know that I actually just saw here in South Carolina, Children's Trust was saying that I think there's a bill that's going forward where even parents and other individuals could become mandated reporters. And so, because I think that what I've seen in some situations is that individuals think, whether it's a church or a camp, is, if I tell my supervisor, then I've reported. No, you need to call DSS in the report line and make that report that someone has been sexually abused if you are a mandated reporter. And in my eyes, we are all mandated reporters, because I don't believe that any child should have to experience sexual abuse and it goes undisclosed and brought, not brought to someone's attention who can protect them and bring safety into their lives. So thank you for touching on that. And for those of you that are joining us again, thank you. We were just touching on sexual assault, child sexual abuse, understanding what consent is, that it needs to be a clear yes, but also understanding that it can be revoked, that that person can change their mind because it's their body and they have a right to make that decision. Tawanda, you said, okay, great explanation of consent. Thank you. Yes. And yes, teachers are mandated reporters. Yes, absolutely.
The consent conversation, because I have these conversations in schools with teenagers, some of the questions that come up, and it's normally after the session, after you're done with the presentation on one-on-one, is, you know, things like prom, things like date nights, going on dates. We all want to go and engage in dates, and so sometimes there's always the question of, what if I agreed to it the day before, like Ricky alluded to? What if I did agree in text message that I wanted to have sex? Now he has that. And so sometimes when you think about why don't people come forward, it's filled with shame and guilt. They feel as though they have a sense of responsibility. And so it's important for us as a community to empower individuals to say, hey, although I may consent to this at one time, even if it's via text message, that can always be revoked. And so that's important for our young adults to know, everyone to know.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think it's also important to put consent in the frame of not just in regards to sexual interactions, right? So like asking for consent to do things like hug people, right? Like anything that engages another person. Do I have your permission to do this? Right. So if you teach it from that perspective, then it's a lot easier to understand it when you bring sex into the fold, right? You understand that this is someone's body and I'm not allowed to violate it in any way. Right. So if I can't hug them with clothes on, then I shouldn't be able to assault them. You know what I mean? Like it makes it a lot more plain when you teach it as something like ongoing from the time you are a child, right? Teaching children like, hey, you don't have to hug everybody that wants to hug you or sit in everybody's lap. You know what I mean? Like, and so empowering from a young age outside of just the realm of sex is really important.
Absolutely. And I think that's where it starts, and not just oftentimes we place the responsibility on kids, but really the responsibility on parents and even teachers and other professionals in their life to make sure that they're also reinforcing that, reinforcing the right for them to be able to make choices for themselves and determine and decide if a person can or cannot hug me, and giving them that choice and not making them feel like, oh, go give your uncle a hug. Like you should want to because it's your uncle, but at the same time, allow them to make that choice and not feel pressured into having to do something that they may not want to do and may have a legitimate reason why they don't want to. And if they don't, they also don't have to have a legitimate reason. It can just be because I don't want to. And that's okay. Like, and that's completely fine. My kids tell me all the time if they don't want a kiss from me. So, even though it might hurt my feelings. But, and so I also wanted to make sure, as we talked about sexual assault, that we also talk about intimate partner violence. Because this was something that also came up. Okay, before I get in there, I'll answer this question. Thank you, Ms. Tawanda. So she said, are there things that we should look for as teachers as tattletale signs that a child may be being abused? Yes. I think there are some signs. There are some things that may not mean that this child is absolutely being sexually abused, but definitely may be something where someone needs to be called in to assess the situation or to speak with them further if there are some concerns there. So I know that like one of those as a school social worker that I often saw, like if there's a sudden change in the child's behavior or in their demeanor, that, could draw when I say sudden change, not like something that is minute or minor,
but a change in their temperament.
A change in their temperament. So if you notice a change in their temperament, that is something that I would say, depending on the age, kids still will, at least when they're 4 years old, they don't sleep anymore in school and kindergarten. Because I was going to say sometimes bedwetting if they're older, but that can even happen at school, you know.
And some of the
as
symptoms are
well.
the same for physical abuse and all of those things. I think it's important just to notice any of those changes to be able to at least inform the parents or have those discussions. Sometimes it's hard to narrow down sexual abuse depending on the age. There are overt things that you can see. Obviously, there are sexual kind of behaviors that seem inappropriate.
I was say that,
those are easily identifiable. Those are definitely worth asking questions about and at least raising it to someone to look into for investigation. Purposes.
And that, I was going to say that's definitely a more obvious one. If you notice that this child has been interacting in a sexual way with their classmates, that's definitely a huge red flag. But there are some that sometimes may be subtle. And sometimes, you know, you don't know. When I was a school social worker, I mean, in my first week of going in class and doing the child sexual abuse prevention trainings with them, like my office filled up with kids after that was over. And it wasn't necessarily that there were things to pre-identify it, but it was more so of them just knowing. I think as educators, what you can do is let your students know that this is a safe environment, that this is a safe place. And anytime you feel that someone is doing something to you that you have to question if it is okay or not, I want you to come to me. I want you to know that I'm a safe adult. And I think having those conversations, whether it's something that's very short, you know, but having those conversations on a continual basis will help students if that was something, unfortunately, that ever happened to them, so that in the event it happened again, they feel confident and comfortable with going to their teacher and disclosing. But a lot of times they tell their friends before they tell an adult. So someone said, my kids are still young, but I'm very open with them. This is Kimberly, and have always been about the dangers and things that can happen, like physical and sexual abuse. It can be men, women, friends, family, strangers, etc. Abuse happens often, and I want them to be aware of the fact that it could be anyone. Luckily, they are open to talk with me and know what to do in those situations. I pray this never happens, but I want them to never be afraid to say something if ever it comes to that. Communication is key, and I think it makes a huge difference with our children and them trusting in us to openly talk to us when they need to. Yes, Kimberly, absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head. Communication is key. Building that trust and relationship is key, because that actually goes in one of the questions, things that we were going to talk about was, you know, why is it so hard sometimes for a survivor to come forward, whether it's a child or whether it's an adult? You know, why is it hard? And I think that, you know, it's based on, and we talked about this in the first episode, but people make a decision way before something happens on what they can talk to you about and what they can't. You know what I'm saying? It's not like, oh, this situation's happened, can I talk to them? It's, I already know I can't talk to them. And so it's so important to have those healthy relationships, to be able to make sure you have a great relationship with your children and with other children, your children friends, because again, they may not be in a home where they can talk to their parents. And you want them to, again, be able to talk to someone who's going to help them, and being aware of resources that are available.
And not just, and I mean, we for sure want children in safe environments, but I think I speak for everyone here. This is like, we want all people to be in safe environments, right? So I know a lot of times when it comes to children, we have soft spots, but then when it comes to adults, we're like, well, why didn't they know better? You know what I mean? Like, why didn't you're grown? You should have been able to protect yourself from that, right? And so the things that we say, the way we make jokes about things, the way we laugh at things, or we pass things off, not knowing what the people next to us have been through, what their lived experiences have been. And so that's how people determine whether or not they're going to trust us. You know what I mean? I heard you make a joke about this person that came forward. So what's to make me believe you're going to believe me? Even though we're close.
You need to feel safe. You need to be no judgment.
No judgment.
I need to know that when I tell you this, you're going to care.
And I think the other component is how often do we ask the kids the question? It's almost like suicide. How often do we ask have you ever thought about killing yourself? And sometimes it's those
Yeah.
questions that why don't we ask them directly?
Yes.
So oftentimes when I'm working with survivors of sexual abuse, there are times, even as kids, that they're waiting to be rescued and just
Yes.
waiting for someone to ask
Yes.
because they don't know
Yes.
how to come forward. So
Mhm.
asking the question
Right.
also is a way to at least let them know and give them an avenue to say yes
Mhm.
or give them an avenue to share.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So I know we want to thank y'all for that, and thank y'all as well that are tuning in with the comments. And please feel free to continue to post your comments or questions that you might have as well. So we wanted to also touch on intimate partner violence real quick because I do think it's also important for people to understand what intimate partner violence is, understanding the dynamics of intimate partner violence, and knowing again that there are resources for both of these that are available here in the community. So let's get to intimate partner violence, because that was something that R. Kelly's ex-wife unfortunately was a victim of by R. Kelly. And so when it comes to intimate partner violence, we know that it can be physical. We know it can be emotional. It can be financial, verbal. We know that it can also be digital as well. It doesn't have to just be in person with an individual. And so I think that oftentimes, I know even in her situation, she didn't recognize that she was being abused initially, right? And so I think that oftentimes in relationships, people, survivors think that it's going to be very blatant in your face, and not understanding that a person who is an abuser is very conniving, they're very manipulative, and their tactics are very subtle. Hardly ever is it 1 to 10 explosive. There were things that were in between there that you probably dismiss 9 times out of 10, or you recognized it but didn't really think it was a big deal. Maybe there was a reason why, they got upset the way they did. You try to see things from both perspectives. You try to rationalize the situation. But those were moments oftentimes where the perpetrator is seeing how you're going to respond. They're gauging what you'll do. So they may make negative comments, which is called gaslighting, right? So they may belittle you or demean the individual as well. And so those are just some of the different ways or signs. And of course, we also know there's a cycle of abuse. And I think that was something that R. Kelly really kind of highlighted and showed even through his violent behavior as well. You want to touch on that?
For sure. So, I mean, we know that most relationships start off like a honeymoon stage, right? Where everything's great. You love each other. You're texting all night. I know when I was coming up, it was like you hang up. No, you hang up. We're going to stay on the phone all night type thing, right?
Wait till you breathe.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like all that stuff is cheesy or whatever, but, we really like someone that honeymoon stage. And then it moves into a tension building stage. And so here's where we start to see some things like the abuser or manipulator may start to isolate the person or make small statements about what they're wearing or how they look in something, things like that. Little things, right, to see, like you said, what your response is going to be. And so with R. Kelly particularly, they talked about the fact that the first thing was kind of call me daddy. And if they did that, then okay, now I got them. Now we're going somewhere, right? So now you call me daddy, now cook for me. And then his wife talked about the fact that you couldn't cook eggs the right way. No matter how you cooked them, they were never good enough for him, right? And so then it was, you're stupid, you don't know how to do this small thing, right? And so the thing that we know with abusers is though, no matter how much you try to please, they always move the standard. Right? Like it doesn't matter what you do, you're not going to do it well enough to ever please them, which then in turn gives them the justification to perpetuate the abuse. And so when the tension escalates and you're not doing what they said do, no matter how they said do it, that you think you're now doing it, it's not good enough. And that's when we see the actual if the physical abuse comes into play,
Right.
that's when it happens. But it goes through so many things before it ever gets to the actual
Explosive,
physical.
right.
Yeah, like there are so many telltale signs that we think are, this person cares about me, right? They don't want me to be around other people because they want to have me to themselves because they
Right.
love me so much.
Yeah.
You know
That's
what
so
I mean?
true,
Well, they said that when I did this, it reminded them of this thing that happened to them before, and so that's why they reacted this
right.
way.
The way that they did.
And it's
Yeah.
also, we all are placed on this earth with a set of resources based on our environment, and sometimes, and a lot of times, perpetrators in these situations, they recognize there's an unmet need and they tap into that.
Yeah.
So if there's a financial need,
Yeah.
I'm going to come in and I'm going to save the day
Right.
financially. What
Right.
that does is keep you secured. It makes it harder.
And makes you dependent
Yeah.
on them.
And-
Absolutely.
And R. Kelly's ex-wife has said now that, any number of times that she's come out publicly against him, he stopped paying child support.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
And she's dependent upon,
Absolutely.
you know what I mean? Because
Right.
he effectively crippled her career.
Mhm.
And so she's dependent upon the fact that they have 3 children together.
Right.
So he won't pay the mortgage. He won't, you know what I mean? He won't do
Right.
those things.
And
so now she has to be silent again
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
in order to be able to live.
Right.
You know what I mean? So,
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think I see Travis, thank you for your question. I'm gonna get to that. But I just wanted to say, related to IPV too, is understanding that like it doesn't always like happen in that cycle.
No.
Like sometimes it may start in another place. Sometimes it might never get to a honeymoon
Right.
phase, right? Like sometimes it stays in that hostile, very high escalated place as well. So I think it's important for people to understand. Sometimes you're like waiting to see like, well, is he going to do this? Or is she going to do this? And it may not, it's not always textbook. So it's important to understand that just like it can happen to anybody, there's not a prototype or a certain demographic that sexual violence or intimate partner violence can happen to. There's also not a certain phase or path.
Right.
There are definitely like red flags that oftentimes do take place, but there's not like this one narrow way that or singular way that it can happen. So I'm going to get to Travis' question. So he said a couple of things that I've noticed with the R. Kelly situation is that it has been publicly open. He publicly opened himself about things that happened in his life as a child that seemed to translate to his adult life. He was exposed to abuse at a young life and also exposed to sexual behaviors at a young age. Do you believe that such incidents can stunt the view of such behaviors if exposed as a young age and not addressed through counseling or having the right people in your life? I'm in no way saying that he did any of those things because there are now different accounts coming out from his nutritionist and his group public announcement. So yes, Travis, I would say that while it definitely, I think that we have to recognize the fact that he was sexually abused as a child, and we recognize the fact that it did not go acknowledged and reported, and it did not he was not treated. The trauma was not addressed that he had experienced in his life. And so while it influenced the decisions that he's made as an adult, and even himself as recognized, and I know we touched on this, you touched on this a lot the last time, but even in recognizing that that he is over sexualized, right? He didn't see it as an issue or a problem that he needed to actually get support on. So once he came of age of understanding that what I went through was being abused and my over sexualization is attached to the child sexual abuse that I experienced, there wasn't an intervention, even as an adult, that he sought for himself.
Right.
And had he sought that intervention, not to say that some of these things wouldn't have happened, but I don't know if it would have been to the degree that it is today.
Right. And I think we have to be careful here, realizing that while people who are abused are more prone to risky behaviors, but that does not mean that they're more prone to becoming abusers.
Yeah.
Right. And so understanding that, yes, he has had traumas that have not been addressed in a healthy way. Yes, he has had traumas that have not been addressed in a healthy way. That in no way gives an
Doesn't
excuse
Right.
for what he's done for the last 30 years as an adult.
It's been
You know what I mean?
perpetual.
You know
It's
what I
been
mean?
acknowledged. His wife has come forward.
Yeah, like,
so there's been
he's
cyclical
been
behavior.
and he's been intentional about it, like going to McDonald's where kids are, or malls where young girls are.
Schools.
It's been very intentional. You know what I mean? So yes, he has things that need to be addressed, but until he wants to acknowledge and accept the fact that that they need to be addressed, no one can force him, but we can hold him accountable for what he's doing now.
Right.
Accountability is necessary.
Yes, absolutely. I would definitely agree that accountability is necessary. And since we're on that, I guess we could ask that question to those of you that are watching. What would accountability for R. Kelly look like? So if any of you have your thoughts around that, you can think about it for a little bit. But we want to hear from you. What do you believe accountability for R. Kelly should look like? What should that look like? Do any of you have an opinion of what R. Kelly's accountability should look like?
I do feel that there is something to be said. I can acknowledge that there are individuals who are able to see more clearly now, and unfortunately it has taken years for people to be able to see R. Kelly for who we see him as now. Not only we do recognize him as being a broken person, but we also recognize the other components to him, which is being a perpetrator and abuser. And so I think that accountability does look like accepting that he is an abuser, especially for the Black community, and that's and for some that's challenging because it seems like there's an association of guilt, right? Because if you listen to his music, it seems now that, okay, what if I took part in that, And so I think that accountability looks like acceptance first, especially in the Black community. And that recognizing that it's just not condemning another Black African-American man. This is an African-American man who conducted criminal acts. And so we have to add that layer there and acknowledge that truth.
Yeah, no, I think that's important. I think this is in many ways been pitched as an effort to bring down another Black man. So I think first what has to happen is for Black folks, we have to decide what community looks like. Right? And so if we're going to say we're a part of community, then that means protecting all of us, right? But protecting us from vile acts like what R. Kelly has been accused of doing, right? Not protecting those people who perpetrate those vile acts, right? For so long, I think that Black men have been taught that they are the most endangered species in the world, right? That we don't believe anything that we do has effects on anybody else or can harm anyone else, right? And so now you see that his victims have been Black women, and so the burden is on them. Do you report a Black man and send another Black man to jail, or do you protect yourself, right? So first we have to decide what community really looks like for us. Then I think it is on R. Kelly to admit to what he's done, right? Before we ever introduce this idea of forgiveness, right? Even if you want to go biblical, he's never acknowledged his wrongdoing. So that's not grounds for forgiveness. If you say like, I grew up in a faith tradition where, the Bible says you forgive. No. The Bible says that first you repent for what it is that you've done, right? He's never done that. Second of all, I don't think forgiveness has to be pushed on people. People get to decide when they want to forgive. We don't get to decide when people forgive. That's not the way it works. So I think that we first have to decide what community looks like. I think that R. Kelly and people like him who are abusers have to acknowledge what they've done. I am not for sending anyone else to prison, but we can't do any type of restorative justice if you're not willing to own up to what you've done. So if you're not going to own up to it, then the only thing we have is prison. Yeah. So I think he has to own up to it. And then I think, going into the Mute R. Kelly stuff, I think we gotta cut him out. Like our lives can function. There are other songs. There are other songs that you can sing at graduation outside of "I Believe I Can Fly" and the song.
There are other songs you can do at family reunions.
Yeah, like you can
wedding receptions.
Frankie Beverly and Maze.
Family celebration.
Frankie Beverly and Maze has done a great job. With Before I Let Go, you don't have to step in the name of love. It is okay. I promise you can find something else.
Yes, absolutely. So we have Tiffany. Hey, Tiffany. So, yeah, she is definitely done with R. Kelly. She said our young people are so excited and influenced by perceived fame and money and what they see on TV. We need to parent them and letting them know what no amount of money or fame is excusable to this behavior. Love and respect yourself. Respect should be taught at a young age. She said castration, no tongue, so he couldn't sing anymore. But I think that, yes, but I also want to highlight that with even not just fame as well, because with young people, but we saw that with the older women in the last episode who were older. These women were like in their late 30s, early 40s, who fell prey to R. Kelly. They were quote unquote super fans and in denial. Well, one of them was a radio personality host. The other one was what one would call a super fan, and was in denial that, I've heard these allegations, but no, like R. Kelly, he could not have, he was on such a high pedestal in her mind that there could have been no way that R. Kelly was capable of doing, because she had created this fantasy based off of his music of who R. Kelly was. And I think that, that's what allowed her to be so easily manipulated by him. But once her eyes opened, she was like, deuces.
I think part of that too, whether she said it or not, I can't recall. Whether she said it or not, I can't recall, but who his victims had been prior to, right? Like that, that matters, right? In our communities, we've often seen where young girls develop faster or whatever, like the stereotype that's put on them is that they're fast, they're looking for this attention, right? Had this been a group of white girls, first of all, you wouldn't have had a chance to meet him in 2000 and something, because he'd have been in jail in 90 something, right? You know what I mean? But the fact that his victims had been black girls, whether or not she said that, I think that directly impacts how we viewed him as whether or not he was really a perpetrator of sexual violence. Because these were young girls who were probably asking for it. They wanted to be famous. They wanted to chase this dream or whatever. And so that we don't allow young black girls or young black boys, for that matter, the experiences of growing up. They're teenager or they're grown from like age 12 to the rest of their life. And so I think that definitely plays into it as well, that victim shaming piece.
And that's
and it matters who.
The victim shaming, and I think that's one of the reasons why for most people don't know that for black women, for every one that discloses their abuse, there are 15 who do not. And I think that a lot of that is influenced by the responses, the shame, the guilt, we know, but it's also around the prejudgment of how they've already been deemed by society. And that's something that is not just confirmed within their community, it's confirmed when they contact the police department sometimes, unfortunately. It's confirmed when they walk into the courtroom. It's confirmed when they go into the hospital. These are unfortunate things that have happened to women and girls of color. And, it's like, for them, it's like, well, man, if I would have, for some of them stepping back, it's like, well, if we would have known that it was going to be like this, then I would have never even decided to disclose in the first place, because they disclose, and then in that, they're being even re-victimized again. And so I definitely think that it's time for us as a community to truly dismantle sexual violence and understanding the historical premises of it being rooted in our community, and really having to take, I believe if we can uproot that, then I think that's where we can begin to heal. We can, because again, historically, we know that Black women bodies were not even valued. They were not even considered to be a human being or a body. And so when you didn't even have a choice over your body, you dare not say anything about being abused, because I'll sell your kids, I'll kill your husband, or whatever the case may be, I'll kill you. It's this thing of that's where it comes from, you know, to what happens in this family stays in this house, or what happens in this house stays in this house, or again, this level of protection that unfortunately happens against Black men, that we as Black women feel the need to protect, because we know that there are other injustices that they might experience within the society and the community. And so it's almost like, well, I know that they did this, but then I don't want them to experience this discrimination or other treatment that they might get if I report this to the police, or they end up getting locked, locked up for this. So there's like all these other things that like play in and go into if somebody is going to disclose their abuse or not, and come forward and seek the support.
I think sometimes with the family dynamics or the relational dynamics is that sometimes it's easy to lose sight of the person's experience because of perception. And sometimes it does seem like it's out of care, because we know that people can be cruel, we know that people can be judgmental, but at the same time we take away the voice of the person that's coming forward. And I think in a lot of family dynamics, there have been a lot of times where people have come forward and they've shared with their mother or their grandmother, and sometimes those beliefs that she stated already is that, what did you do? Why did you walk around in those shorts? All of those victim shaming that if it's coming from the person that's closest to you, then sometimes there is that that guilt associated with that. Like, what did I do? How did I contribute? And that's carried, throughout childhood or throughout adulthood. But the other component of that is just just allowing them to have a voice. How do we do that?
And I think, and Tiffany, we see your comment as well about the cultural differences that happen. I think that while there are definitely things even in other parts of Southeast Asia where things happen, some things unfortunately there are legal in other places of the country where they have legalized prostitutes and things of that nature in some of these other countries. And so, but we know that sexual violence is a national problem. It's not, it's an international, it's a global, societal, human issue. Like sexual violence is worldwide. It's happening in every open place and every dark place. It's happening, and it's been happening since the beginning of time. And so, but unfortunately, within the African American community and within the Native American community, it happens at a higher rate. And that is the issue. The issue is not only is it happening at a higher rate, there's also less disclosure, there's less support that's taking place. And so there's a need for us to really peel back some of these barriers and some of the systemics, the stigmas and the things that really are hindering people from being able to come forward. And I think this is our last talk back, and it's been great. Thank y'all who have continued to watch with us for the last 3 weeks. If there's anything that we want you, I think I can speak on behalf of all of us to say to really take back is, being willing to have like these conversations. We're not saying that you got to come and volunteer at our agency, although we would love that.
We'll take it.
But it's having these conversations at your kitchen table. It's having these conversations, these very difficult, hard conversations with your friends. It's having these conversations with your coworkers. And if you at church, if you hear somebody talking about, or victim blaming, being the one to step in and say, you know what, actually, that's victim blaming. And here's why we shouldn't do that, because we don't know who else might be present that this might hinder them from coming forward. So be the one to step in and be that voice. I would also say, believe. If you have somebody that comes to you and they disclose, believe. It's not our job. It's not, even as advocates, it's not your job to determine whether or not this person is telling the truth or what all happened or why they had this on or why. That stuff doesn't matter. So I think that, and I'll make sure I see your question, Brittany, making sure you believe, but then also making sure that if somebody does disclose as well, that you ask them what they need in that moment. Don't try to determine for them what steps they should take. ask them, how can I support you? And know again that there are services here. And so Brittany said, what advice can you give to those who have reported their assault, abuse, or rape, and maybe there was nothing the justice system could do to prove what happened? How do those victims find healing and closure and realizing that it wasn't their fault? That's a good one. I think we can all speak to that.
Yeah.
You want to start first, Ashley?
Yeah, sure. I think there are several ways. First, justice is always the goal. But it does not, lack of justice does not dismiss or terminate the experience.
Right.
And we understand that it's important to acknowledge. Counseling, for one, to be able to process the trauma, but also as you go throughout life, triggers that we have, sometimes we have to assume that they're informed by our past. And so there are times when we tackle the abuse, but when we engage in relationships and then we begin to rear children, sometimes even when the children become the age of the time that you may have been abused, it brings up other triggers. It's constantly processing it through and allowing yourself time to just heal. And support groups are essential. Being around other individuals that have encountered various traumatic incidents, sometimes it helps in normalizing it. It makes it real, validating.
Right.
And there's a kindredship, I guess, that is established, and rapport is established. All of those things, journaling, getting your thoughts out and not internalizing and bottling that in. And then if you believe in a higher power of spirituality, knowing that God ultimately is the healer and that there is still hope. And so that's what I would offer.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ashley.
Yeah, so just from my perspective, and I guess speaking more from an agency kind of perspective, at Sexual Trauma Services, we offer therapy, counseling to survivors at no cost, no matter when it happened. So if it happened yesterday, if it happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever, it doesn't matter. Like you want to come in and talk to somebody, cool. And then also offering that for secondary survivors, right? So, maybe someone was affected by it and
or was your child.
Yeah, your child or your whatever.
Closing in about 10 minutes.
Okay.
Gotcha. And so offering support for them, and like you said, the support groups, things like journaling. I'm not a clinician, so I won't speak to exactly how to move past it because I'm not licensed or trained in that way. But know that there are a number of options. Just because, like you said, justice was not served doesn't mean the experience didn't happen. And so there are a number of resources. And so I think I speak for all of us again when I say, please reach out. If you know anyone or if you have dealt with this and you feel like, it's something you still need to process, work through, please reach out. And I think all of us will be happy to connect you with someone that could serve you and definitely help you.
And I think what I would add to that as an individual who has an organization, but also I'm a survivor as well, is that it's absolutely very important to know that you can have healing beyond justice. And I also think it's, we have to define for ourselves what justice really looks like, because for some, justice may not be through the courtroom. And so, but that's more of an individual thing. And I think for that individual, they would have to identify, well, what does justice look like for me? Right. And then not allowing that if it's something that is beyond your ability to make sure that happens, that as they've said, that you still heal, or that individual make sure that they allow themselves to heal, and understanding as well that we think, I always say, I envision like church and going to the altar and, we go to be healed or delivered, but that healing is continual. It's not a one-time singular experience. And so you're continuing, I'm continuing to heal, right? So I'm never at this place where I've evolved and I don't have to continue to work on myself or allow myself to grow, because dynamics and things in my life change that impact or that might trigger that trauma and bring it up in my life and it looks differently. Absolutely, I would say making sure whether it's a support group, whether it's just having someone that you can talk to when there's a shared experience, you know, that is able to just support you and be that social emotional support. Our services are free and confidential. Also making sure, because I don't know in this situation with the person, like if it was, if it was something that was like beyond the court or there was some other like DNA or legal reasons, but like in the state of South Carolina, there are no statute of limitations. So like as Ricky was saying, it doesn't matter if it happened 25 years ago, 50 years ago, you can still go forward even in legal action if you want to. And so also just making sure that that individual person is aware of the state law around disclosing abuse. I think that's also really important. But, you know, again, asking and defining for oneself, what does healing look like for me? And how can I attain that for myself in a way that's going to bring me peace? What does healing look like for me? What does justice look like for me? So that's what I would say. But y'all, this has been great. Please know I'll put the national hotline as well. RAIN.org has a chat room where you can actually just text and talk to a person. There's so many resources and things that are out there, but definitely please feel free at any point in time to email the Hive at info@thehivecc.org or shoot us a message on social media. We are quick to respond to that. If you're local here in South Carolina, STSM has a crisis line. I think I've almost memorized y'all crisis. It's like, I think it's like 771-7273. Am I saying it?
I don't know.
Don't let me mess you up. Okay.
But
okay.
yeah. So
but yes, STSM, I've tagged them in this live, and they do have a 24-hour crisis line as and so you can definitely reach out to them. So again, thank y'all so much. And Ashley, can you let them know how to get in contact with you?
PalmettoCounseling.com. Our number is 803-254-9767. And so feel free to reach out. We have over 22 providers, and a number of them do specialize in sexual trauma.
Yeah, thank you. And our number for anyone that needs also may want it is 803-470-5572. So again, thank y'all so much. You had something you wanted to say?
Little plug.
Yes.
So while you guys, I know, do amazing work with therapy and STSM does it as well. If you're in the area and you're looking for primary prevention education, right? So having these conversations earlier at STSM, we do a number of things, starting with children as young as 3 and working all the way through adulthood. We work with parents. We have programming that's specific to faith communities, legal advocacy. I work with men, people of color, LGBTQIA+, athletes, rural populations. So we have a little bit of something for everybody. So we definitely, while everything is happening around this and the attention is focused on this, let's start having these conversations. Right? Beyond the social scope, media. Let's have these conversations in healthy places where we can ask questions, right? And we can learn more and we can find out about how to build better and healthier communities for everyone.
And thank you for that, that plug. And the Hive, we too definitely do provide preventative service as well. We focus within historically underserved communities, and so we go out to faith-based community schools. We haven't worked as young as 3 yet, so that's one. That's awesome. that's awesome. But we do work with those that starting in middle school and going up and being able to provide prevention, whether it's in a professional setting or a personal setting as well. So again, thank y'all so much for joining us. Please, if you have not liked and followed Facebook, our Facebook page, please do so. And if you couldn't do anything else, please share this video so that we can continue to educate, inform, and we can act as a community. So thank y'all again so much for everyone who has tuned in, and we hope that y'all all have an amazing night. Thank y'all. Have a good night.